Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier episode 4. Let's talk about it. So Falcon and the Winter Soldier episode 4 picked up right where we left off last week in episode 3, where we saw that banging cliffhanger, that incredible cliffhanger with, of course, the arrival of Ayo, one of the Dora Milaje who work for the throne of Wakanda. I was so excited. I can't believe I made it a week. I can't believe it. We survived the week and now we get to see what follows on from that incredible cliffhanger from last week. Before we even return to the streets of Latvia, we do get a flashback to Wakanda, surprisingly enough, where this time we get to see Bucky in his natural element. At least that's what it was before he was called to action in Infinity War, and he is in the final stages of erasing the Hydra conditioning that he endured for decades. And we see Ayo using the words that Zemo revealed to us as an audience that Hydra previously used against him in order to kind of activate his Winter Soldier conditioning, but this time around she is checking to make sure that all of the work that the Wakandan scientists have done in order to reverse this conditioning has actually worked. And so you see this incredibly emotionally impactful moment where, of course, you have Bucky, who's literally in the middle of nowhere, just in case he goes on this murderous rampage. He's in the middle of nowhere with Ayo, and she's reading out these Russian words, and each word that comes along is making him more anxious, okay, more worried, and just so emotionally stricken. It is an incredible sequence to behold, and I think Sebastian Stan obviously doing the actoring. Okay, the tears, the puppy dog eyes. I was like, no please allow this to work, because he just can't take this much anguish anymore, and he's so afraid that he's going to break into that Winter Soldier programming. He thinks that this isn't going to work, that he can't even bring himself to believe that it will work, but eventually it does, and she tells him, you're free, like you're actually free. And this is the second time that we've heard someone tell Bucky this, but he can't quite seem to grasp onto this idea of freedom, being free to exercise his own autonomy for the first time in literally like several decades, like literally 80 years or so. And so it's a hard concept for him to kind of come around to, even now after he's already experienced the end of his conditioning. But at that moment where he's just realized that he actually has his own mind back, he can scarcely believe it, but you can see the joy and the relief in his eyes. And I think once again Sebastian Stan doing the actoring, because that scene was so incredible to witness. That scene also helps set up the relationship that developed between Bucky and the Dora Milaje, but specifically with Ayo, because when of course we return back to Latvia in the present day, we see them kind of have this standoff with each other where Ayo expresses her disappointment and her feeling of betrayal at the fact that Bucky actually helped release Zemo from prison. Zemo, the one who orchestrated the death of their king, King T'Chaka, in the UN. How could he possibly allow Zemo to escape and to work with him? And you know, Bucky tries to explain to her that it's just a means to an end, that they're working on this mission and he's a key component of it, but she is gracious enough to give him an 8-hour deadline. And you can definitely see that there is a break in this relationship, the friendship that developed between them and the trust that Bucky had in order to place those words in Ayo's hands and to allow her to say that, knowing that ultimately it could potentially mean that he would be reactivated into the Winter Soldier. Like, that was a lot of trust that was built between him and the Wakandans, and that's been broken by the fact that Bucky betrayed them essentially by choosing this new mission over the kind of loyalty that he had to the Wakandans, considering how much they'd done for him. So soon after, Ayo does inform Bucky that he has an 8-hour window in order to make this thing happen before they're coming along for Zemo, whether he likes it or not. He heads back into Zemo's kind of lair, okay, the place that he was headed towards in last week's episode, where we see he has this kind of this safe house, okay, with incredible stained glass windows. Okay, it's a very cool place that they hang out in several times in this episode, and this episode overall did feel very contained. Okay, there were a lot of places that they visit in this episode that look quite similar, but it did very much feel like a lot of the events that took place throughout this episode were within like less than a mile of each other. Like, you could feel the constraint, at least in my opinion. But still, I did like the locale of Zemo's safe house. Okay, it was a very chill place, and Zemo himself is chilling. Zemo himself is so comfortable. I can't believe it. Like, of all the things that I expected to happen and expected to come out of this series, me actually liking Zemo, okay, and him coming out as one of the best kind of new / reintroduced characters of the show was not one of them, okay? I did not expect this in the slightest. And speaking of Zemo, since we're already on the topic, yes, of course, I saw the Zemo cut, okay? I saw the Zemo cut, which is this extended cut of Zemo dancing from last week, okay? Marvel gave us more footage of that dance. Apparently there was a ton more, and they put it on a loop on their channel for like an hour. But anyways, this character has turned out to be one of the more kind of interesting, enjoyable characters to come out of this series, and honestly, it's just down to Daniel Bruhl's incredible portrayal of him. So Bucky ends up meeting the gang at Zemo's safe house, where he informs him that he does have that 8-hour deadline before the Dora Milaje come to get him, okay? And when they come to get you, but best believe you're already got, okay? So Zemo's like, okay, fine, now that I know this information, thank you. But they're trying to find a way to find Carly, and they're trying to kind of brainstorm how they would do that. This part of the plot, I don't know, like, I personally don't know. You guys already know my thoughts on the Flagsmashers, and we'll get into that later on in this review, but it's fine. It's the next stage of the mission. They're trying to find Carly, whatever. And again, like I said, a lot of the locations in this episode feel like they're like less than a mile away from each other. So to me, I just kept thinking, like, it can't be that hard to find Carly. Like, it can't be that hard, okay? And she has a very recognizable face and very recognizable features, like her hair. You can spot that from a mile away. I feel like they could have brought Zemo back to prison or given him to the Dora Milaje and just taken it from there, quite frankly. But, you know, fine. We need Zemo to help find Carly, I guess, even though it's Sam's idea to kind of look out for any events that might have taken place as a result of Donya's passing, because he does bring to mind the idea of this kind of matriarch of a community like his TT. So it stands to reason that people from that community would come together and congregate for a kind of funeral to say goodbye to their matriarchal figure. And so they end up banking on the idea that Carly would want to attend that funeral in order to, you know, say goodbye to this mother figure that she had. And so that's how they're going to end up confronting her and catching her. So it's kind of Sam's idea anyway, is what I'm saying, but whatever. And so their mission becomes trying to figure out where the funeral is going to be. And this is another element of the mission where I felt like people were kind of fumbling the ball a little bit, okay? Like, why was Sam going up to everyone asking if they knew who Donya was? You know, like, as if anyone is going to trust you. These people are paranoid, okay? These people are in a camp because they've been chucked aside by society. Why are they going to let you in when they think that you're a symbol of the people that have oppressed them? Even if you aren't carrying the shield, they see you as an Avenger, and they think like the Avengers are on that side, and therefore why would I allow an Avenger to find out about this matriarchal figure in our community who brought us together? Like, what? No one's thinking. No one's thinking is my point. And then you also have Bucky as well, who was just kind of there. I just felt like they were off as a team, basically, which I'm sure is intentional because they're hardly a team. They're not even partners, as Bucky and Sam keep insisting. So I feel like they definitely need to kind of get on the same page and work together as a team, because they just work so much more fluidly when they do. But in terms of Zemo, like, he doesn't need a team, okay? He doesn't need a teammate or a partner. He's a one-man show. He gets the job done, okay? Because his Turkish delights, he pockets some Turkish delights from earlier, and he goes to the kids. Genius. See, someone thinking. He goes to the children, and he's like, oh, have you heard of, you know, Mama Donya? You know, I wanted to pay my respects to her. He offers the kids some candy, and he's like, oh yeah, my son loved these candies. And these kids are like, yeah, okay, we'll tell you where the funeral is. And then he points to Sam and Bucky, and he's like, don't trust those men. Don't trust them. And the whole time I was thinking, first of all, Bucky's standing like 2 meters away. How can he not hear him with his super hearing? Whatever. But secondly, later on, it doesn't even become a factor because the kid ends up leading Zemo and Sam and Bucky and the rest, we'll talk about them in a second, towards the funeral anyway. So I don't really know why they kept that, other than it was funny. Like, it was cute and it was funny. But Zemo is on the ball. You see the difference here? Okay, these two are off a little bit in this sequence. Zemo is on the ball getting the job done, and I'm actually surprised that he ended up revealing the location of that funeral, because quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if he hadn't. But at the same time, as I mentioned, Zemo does have a plan. He is laser focused on the plan and the objective that he is trying to accomplish. So even though he has to risk the fact that Sam and Bucky could turn on him the second that he gives away the location of the funeral, he could just be handed over to the Dora Milaje for them to do whatever they want with him, okay? He knows this, but at the same time, he's calculated the risk against him potentially getting close to Karli, perhaps killing her, perhaps getting his hands on the super soldier serum and destroying it for good. We'll talk about that in a second. So he's already calculated the risk and the reward for this scenario, and that's why in that moment he decides, okay, I'm actually going to tell them so that he can get closer to Karli and to the Flagsmashers and deal with his ultimate mission, which is to destroy super soldiers. So I feel like he, once again, is so focused on his mission, and even though at times, you know, his objectives might align with that of Sam and Bucky's, make no mistake, this guy has a mission of his own and he's working towards that and that alone. And I think the show keeps reminding us of this intentionally, because no matter how charming, okay, and charismatic Zemo becomes throughout this series, we still get these little sprinklings of reminders that the guy is ultimately working towards his own ends. And one of the best reminders that I feel like was just so perfect for this character was when he was walking through the square trying to lure in the children by singing Bar Bar Black Sheep. He was singing Bar Bar Black Sheep, trying to lure them with Turkish delights. And it's so ironic because obviously here in this scenario, Zemo is not a sheep, okay? He is very much a wolf. He is the big bad wolf that's about to eat them all up. So I feel like the show very much reminds us constantly, whether it's through his literal act of violence like killing the doctor that created this new version of the super soldier serum, Dr. Nagel, or later on in this episode where we see that he automatically goes for the kill with Karli the first opportunity that he gets, and without even question, without even hesitation, Zemo decides to stomp all over the super soldier serum. As soon as he sees it splayed on the floor, he just goes, ha! He just goes ham. And I honestly admire that about the character, because he's true to his word. Like, he practices what he preaches. He says that super soldiers need to come to an end. The idea that these people who are, you know, above regular people are to be worshipped, are to be seen as supreme above all others is really dangerous. And he's seen that time and time again through these, you know, historical figures like he uses the example of Nazis and Hitler, but also in this world we have the Red Skull, and also with Captain America. I mean, if you think back to Captain America Civil War, one of the things that he remarks on is the color of Steve's eyes and the idea that he has flecks of green in them. And that's just kind of a reflection of how Zemo sees super soldiers overall, is that even this version of a super soldier, Steve, who has good in him, who is fundamentally a good man, before he even had the super soldier serum in his veins, and that was just amplified. But even in that example, Zemo could see the flaws within him, and that film very much explored the flaws that Steve had. The idea that he would negate to tell Tony that his best friend killed Tony's parents in cold blood. Like, he didn't say anything. He didn't say anything because he was trying to protect Bucky, and that was a huge betrayal for Tony Stark in Civil War. So even that character, this person that everyone is trying to live up to, whether it be Fake Cap, whether it be Sam, whether it be Bucky, even him, he was not perfect. And Zemo sees the issue, the threat, the danger of having someone who already isn't perfect be amplified using the serum and then be worshipped by people who are in dire circumstances. And honestly, in the case of Zemo, as I already said in my review last week, I know this is gonna go downhill, okay? I know I'm about to face huge amounts of betrayal, okay? Huge amounts of disappointment in this character. It's just a matter of time, okay? Any time now he's gonna disappoint me, I know. But I still think out of all of these kind of potential villain characters that we have, whether it be Zemo or Fake Cap or the Flagsmashers, Zemo is the most compelling, okay? Because even though we're dealing with grey areas for pretty much every single character on the show, whether it be Sam, Bucky, or any of the other villains, I still think in the case of Zemo, his thought process, his reasoning has been so well defined because of his appearance in Captain America Civil War, and now the way that this character has been developed and the circumstances that he's in, and the idea that he wants to rid the world of super soldiers, and that hasn't changed. In fact, that's been even more proven because of the actions of the Flagsmashers. That's all aligning for me very, very well, and I feel like his character is one of the best written in terms of the villains that we have here. And it works even better when you consider how well this guy works with our two main protagonists. They make a really good team. I'm going to be so sorry to see them break up, but it is inevitable at this point, of course. I also really enjoy the interactions that Zemo has with Sam. We'll get into that later on when we talk about Sam and Bucky's kind of friendship, non-friendship situation. But Zemo and Sam seem to be clicking. Am I the only one? Am I the only one who's seeing this? Zemo seems to be able to tap into Sam's psyche in a way that Bucky just hasn't even attempted to. Okay? Zemo understands Sam's perspective. He sees that Sam empathizes with the Flagsmashers far more than Bucky does, and he sees Sam's reasoning for why. But he is trying to tell Sam that there is no way that Carly is going to be a redeemable character after this. Like, after what's happened to her, after her being infected by the super soldier serum in the way that she has, and it's running through her veins at this point, there is nothing that can be done to save her. She is irredeemable in Zemo's eyes, because of course he has a very staunch belief about the super soldier serum, but Sam still sees hope in her because he has hope in her motivations. It's just the way that she's trying to carry them out. But I think that's a very interesting conversation that they're having, and it's one that's not even present when it comes to Sam and Bucky's friendship. And again, it's like, how has this show even managed to do that? That is incredible to see Zemo interacting with Sam on a deeper level and actually trying to get to the bottom of Sam's motivations for even pursuing this mission in a way that Bucky hasn't even tried to. That is incredible, okay? And it does make for a very interesting trio dynamic here. And finally, since we're already on the topic of Zemo, and clearly I'm not doing this in chronological order anymore, we do also see the arrival of the Dora Milaje for their collection time, okay? The Dora Milaje said 8 hours and we come to collect, and they meant it, okay? Because just when John Walker was yapping, running his mouth, okay, as Sam said, the only thing that he's running is his mouth in this scenario, the Dora Milaje come along and shake things up. Honestly, it was the mwah. Just mwah. What do you want me to say? It was excellent. It was brilliant. First of all, we see the Wakandan costuming. Oh, it was just smiles all around. And then we see the vibranium spit. Oh god. And John Walker's face when he realizes, hold up, they're not a girl band. They're not the Spice Girls. Okay, they're not the Cheetah Girls. They're the Dora Milaje. Okay, Sam's like, listen, you might want to pick a fight with Bucky before you pick a fight with the Dora Milaje. And they prove themselves to be worthy of that reputation. Wow, just that sequence made it all worth it. I was just smiling. I was so happy. The only thing that did kind of annoy me was that, first of all, I do think that whilst the action sequence may have been incredibly choreographed, I wish I could have seen more of it. I wish I could have seen more of it, because the cuts in that action sequence were intense. There were so many cuts per like 5 seconds. It was crazy. I wish Marvel would stop doing that. And the thing is, I have gone back to watch the action sequences in The Winter Soldier, the movie, and they were so much more drawn out. Like, you were allowed to actually see what was going on. You could see like wide shots of the characters fighting, so you could understand the sequence of events and the movements and the fluidity of those movements. But in the case of this episode, there were so many edits and so many cuts in this action sequence that it was difficult to kind of follow everyone's movement. I feel like it's a shame, because again, the choreography is there, but just to allow it to breathe, just to allow us to see what's going on and the scale of what's going on, I think would have benefited that sequence. And especially when you have cuts to other characters like Zemo just drinking there, being like, oh, this is happening. Like, as cute as that is, as funny as that is, it kind of prevents us from seeing what's going on. And then you also have the cuts to Sam and Bucky initially, and Bucky's just like, lol, like, we're not gonna help you. Like, John Walker's like, and Bucky's like, oh, how's it going there, John? You were talking real big a second ago, and now how is it going? And that was fun, but at the same time, we're not seeing the action. We're not seeing the fighting. Anyways, that was kind of the major criticism that I had of the scene, but otherwise it was sick. Like, let's be real, it was incredible. Okay, and then we get Ayo coming in and just removing Bucky's arm, and I was like, My brain just and she said something in Wakandan that's not even translated in the subtitles, which is frustrating. But I feel like it was like, you know, Bust would be disappointed in you. I feel like she said Bust, which is the kind of cat god. I feel like she basically was like, you know, you disappointed me, basically, like you messed up. And I also feel like there was an echo of, you know, we gave you that arm, we can take it away. Like, I'm surprised she didn't just pick it up and leave with it, but it was just kind of a message saying, we gave you the opportunity to start a new life, to be a free man, and this is how you repay us. Well, guess what? We can take that away if we wanted to. But she chooses not to, which shows that she is one step or several steps above Hydra, which likely would have used that against him forever. And second to that kind of interaction between Ayo and Bucky, I would say that my favorite part of this entire fight sequence was when one of the Dora Milaje took the shield. She took the shield the way that Steve does it, where you step on the shield and it just comes up to you. She took the shield. The image of one of the Dora Milaje in their like traditional costuming, their traditional uniform, holding the Captain America's shield, iconic. Just mwah, I can only applaud. I can only give a standing ovation. And you know what? In that moment, I was like, take it with you. Take it with you. Take it and leave. Because here's the thing, and yes, we're gonna discuss it right here, right now, okay? Because the shield belongs in Wakanda. Oh, oh, you heard me. The shield doesn't belong to Steve Rogers. It doesn't belong to the US government. It doesn't belong to Sam Wilson. It doesn't belong to Bucky Barnes. It belongs in Wakanda, okay? Because listen up. The shield was created by Howard Stark during the Second World War, okay? But Wakanda wasn't trading vibranium during that time. Wakanda simply wasn't giving up that amount of vibranium to a US forces or to anyone. So the only way that Howard Stark would have gotten his hands on that much vibranium is through the black market, through people like Ulysses Claw. Okay, you see where I'm going with this? So this shield doesn't belong to the US government, doesn't belong to Howard Stark, doesn't belong to anyone except Wakanda. So it needs to go back. It needs to go back to Wakanda, okay? It doesn't matter what symbol it's become. Ultimately, that material, that raw material that's worth billions. We saw Tyler Hayward mention in WandaVision how Vision is made up of literally $6 billion worth of vibranium. Yeah, I wonder how much that shield is worth. It needs to go back to Wakanda. So that moment where she picked up that shield, I was like, go home with it, love. Go home with it, love. No one should stop you because it's your property. It belongs to your country. But yes, ultimately, even after that sick action sequence that we got, we do see Zemo escape through the sewers, a la El Chapo, as it's mentioned. So he manages to escape and we don't actually see him for the rest of the episode. And honestly, there is a lot of that in this episode of people fighting, but then someone managing to escape. Again, it feels a little bit contrived, okay? It feels a little bit convenient. Like, Carly manages to escape several times in this episode, and there is one occasion where it literally frustrated me. It was the end sequence, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, it's like, okay. Like, someone could have stopped Zemo. Someone should have been in charge of just looking out for Zemo. Like, someone literally should have just been on his neck the whole time whilst everyone else is clowning around, okay, fighting against these guys. Someone should have just been looking out for him specifically and taking him down. And we should have seen him fight back, actually, come to think of it. Although it was funny to see him just have a drink whilst this was all happening. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about that part, but he does manage to escape because, of course, the plot's got a plot, as is the case with Carly as well. So we don't see what happens to the character by the end of this episode, but we will likely find out in the next couple of episodes coming up. And now let's move on to Sam and Bucky themselves, the other members of this supreme trio that I've enjoyed following in the last couple of episodes. Now, I have to say, when it comes to this episode specifically, there wasn't much that tackled the kind of friendship, non-relationship between Sam and Bucky here, other than the fact that, as I mentioned, I don't think that they're working very well as a team yet, although we do see a little bit of improvement of that at the end there, where Bucky tries to, you know, help Sam out. He punches some guy out and he's like, you're welcome, to Sam. But I still think that they need to kind of coordinate better, because that beginning sequence where they weren't able to find out where someone's funeral was, that's kind of embarrassing. Oh. That's kind of embarrassing, not gonna lie, okay? But there is still somewhat of a disconnect between these characters' motivations, and I quite frankly am getting a little bit frustrated. Okay, it's therapy time. It's therapy time with Jean, okay? Bucky needs to sit down. Bucky needs to sit down and we need to discuss, why doesn't he understand that Sam gave up the shield for his own reasons? He needs to get that through to his mind, because it's mentioned again in this episode just before John Walker himself pops up, you know, speak of the devil and he shall appear. But just before then, Bucky is giving Sam more grief for having given away the shield. Now, I agree. Sam made a mistake by giving away the shield, thinking that it would be safe in this glass case in the Smithsonian. That was a dumb move. I already said this. I agree that he shouldn't have given it away. In fact, if he was going to give it away, he should have given it to Wakanda. Whatever, we've already discussed this. I agree with that aspect of the conversation. What I don't agree with is Bucky just staunchly trying to impose upon Sam the mantle of Captain America solely because their mutual friend Steve Rogers said that he was deserving of the mantle. I'm getting a little bit frustrated with how Bucky seems to be the only one who doesn't understand the socio-political context of Sam's decision, because it seems as though even someone like Carly, even someone like Zemo can understand why Sam would be hesitant to pick up the mantle of Captain America and therefore the physical shield itself that represents a lot of things that Steve Rogers stood for and was able to stand for as a white man, that perhaps Sam Wilson will be reluctant to or hesitant to stand for those same things that don't benefit him in the same way as a black man. Why can't Bucky? You need to sit down at this point. We need to sit down and have this discussion and talk about this directly. I'd be happy to be the therapist in this situation. Okay. I'm not qualified, but I'd be happy to do it. Okay. Literally just no skin off my nose. But we need to talk about this directly because I'm tired of dancing around the situation. The fact of the matter is, Bucky has seen with his own eyes at this point that all of these American values and the idea of, you know, life and liberty and justice that Steve stood for may not necessarily reflect the life experiences that Sam has had as a black man, and would therefore lead to Sam being reluctant towards standing for that same set of values when he feels like they don't apply to him and to people who look like him. Why are we not making that connection? The thing is, it's not even the fact that Bucky doesn't understand where Sam is coming from and why he made that decision to give up the shield. It's the fact that he's not trying to understand. He never questions Sam and says, you know, why is it that you made this decision? Like, why would you turn down the shield when Steve entrusted it with you? Instead, he's just jabbing at him constantly, when in reality he should be trying to level with him and understand where he's coming from. And again, I must reiterate, it's so frustrating to see all of these other characters around Sam be able to identify with him more, whether it be Zemo, who seems to have taken a class on African American studies, or whether it be Carly, who likely has a little bit more of a connection for where Sam is coming from, judging by her conversation with Sarah. But they all seem to be able to understand him better than Bucky, who's supposed to be his, I guess, wingman in this situation. I think he needs to do a better job. Bucky needs to do a better job of meeting Sam in the middle and letting go of this idea that Sam accepting the shield would bring him some sort of indirect validation as well, because if Steve was right about Sam, then he was right about Bucky as well. Like, there's so much to unpack when it comes to his reasoning behind why he wants Sam to take on the shield, and it has nothing to do with Sam's own motivations and desires of his own. There's so much to unpack there that I think hopefully they'll be able to in the next 2 episodes. But yeah, it's a very complicated relationship that these guys have, and it's a lot to resolve in 2 episodes of the show. So I hope that they do address it directly. Now, earlier I was trying to do this in chronological order, but that's just kind of been thrown out of the window. Like, we're just doing it thematically, I guess. So next up, here come the Flagsmashers. Now, I feel like I'm this principal of a high school who's like calling in the naughty students to take a seat in front of me, okay, and addressing my concerns for their behavior, okay, because I've been trying to give the Flagsmashers a chance from the very beginning. I've told you guys that I'm not as confident about that side of the storytelling. I feel like the Flagsmashers as a whole has kind of been clumsily handled, but I've been trying to give them a chance. And in last week's review, I did kind of look at it from the perspective of, you know, international relations and political theory, to try and dive into some of the philosophical and political arguments that are kind of a baseline for their whole storyline. So I did try to give these characters a little bit more depth and to try and be invested in that side of the story. But after this week's episode, I'm like, yeah, no, I was right. I was right. So first of all, we have the character of Carly. Now, Carly is yet another example of a character who's in the grey zone. Like I said, every single character on this show is in the grey zone. There is no one who is wholly good and wholly evil here. So Carly is in the grey zone because even though the means by which she wants to achieve her objective are incredibly bad, okay, incredibly awful, the objectives themselves aren't that objectionable. And in fact, what she wants is something that a lot of people, especially disenfranchised people, after the blip, can kind of get on board with. And that's why she has so much support in this kind of grassroots campaign, because a lot of people are suffering, and she seems to be one of the few people with power and with ability to do something who are actually recognizing that. So that is a very attractive kind of manifesto for a lot of people, and I understand why it makes her more of a complex character, because a lot of people are being left behind after the blip. I don't know why. I have to say, I don't know why. What kind of system has been set up where half the world are being left behind after the blip, even though they're the ones that rebuilt I'm very confused on that front. And I guess that's kind of the main problem that I have with the character of Carly, is that whilst ultimately her being kind of a Robin Hood and trying to help people is something that you can definitely get behind automatically in any story, it's difficult to see how she got to this point. It's difficult to understand her backstory here because we don't have a full understanding of what the world looks like post-blip. I'm getting very conflicting ideas of the post-blip world from these different projects, because from Spider-Man Far From Home, I've already mentioned this, but it was used to like comedic effects. Like the blip wasn't seen as this, you know, big disastrous thing that led to tons of people losing their homes and losing their communities or anything of the sort. In Spider-Man Far From Home, it was seen as this massive inconvenience that people had to get used to. The idea that you would be in the same class as someone who is like 5 years younger than you, like that was kind of like a ha thing. And in the case of WandaVision, we don't really get to see what life was like post-blip at all, because we're largely just in Wanda's little bubble, this kind of reality that she's created for herself in order to escape her own traumas that have nothing to do with the blip itself, even though we do have hints towards the suffering that people faced during the whole snapping situation, with Tyler Hayward saying, "You have no idea what we had to do during that time." So we do get hints of the struggle there, but in this series it's presented as like a catastrophe. It's presented as like the world has just gone to shit, okay, and half of the population are being left behind, even though they were the ones who were there trying to rebuild after the snapping happened. So I'm kind of confused as to where the world is at. I feel like there needs to be something in this series, or maybe before this series, that explains the state of the world during this time in the MCU, because I'm very confused. I'm very confused as to how we've gotten to the point where there are terrorists who want to just have one world with no borders. Like, was it really that great during the snapping? I'm confused, because some people like Tyler Hayward are telling me that it was awful during the snapping, and we see just how run down Westview is when Wanda actually goes there. So it couldn't have been that great. But then at the same time, people like Carly found a community where everyone was helping each other out. There seemed to be no borders or no restraints in terms of territories, and that's how everyone was able to come together, and that's what she wants to return to. But surely she realizes that that only worked in those dire circumstances, and that may not necessarily be able to be replicated when half of the world has returned. Another thing is that, if I'm honest, I don't really understand how the means by which she wishes to achieve these ends even makes sense. Like, her plan is to essentially build an army of about 20 super soldiers. To do what? Like, take down the world's armies? Like, I don't understand. Like, take down the entire world order and then build a new world where there are no flags needed, there are no territories, there are no borders, and everyone can kind of just help each other out. How do you plan on doing that with just 20 super soldiers? As much as super soldiers are incredibly strong and fast, I mean, we see that through the action sequences in this episode, they can't really take down the entire world order, at least not with without another organization behind them. The reason why Bucky was so effective in creating issues for certain governments and certain world leaders is because he had Hydra behind him, controlling him and pointing him towards whatever targets that they wanted him to kill. So it doesn't really work when you have like 20 super soldiers who are just out there without really any plan. Just vibes. Karli is making dumb decisions left, right and center. Why did she go to the hiding place for the serum, and she strapped it on herself before heading towards Donya's funeral, only for it to, of course, land in the wrong hands? Like, why would she? That's such a dumb decision to make. So I don't understand what her plan is to recreate a whole new world order without someone pulling the strings in the background. I guess the main issue for me when it comes to the Flagsmashers ultimately is that at this point they're operating like a charity, like a non-governmental organization that happens to have really strong people on the ground working to gather resources for those who need it. That's essentially what they are. Our main superheroes aren't the only ones that Karli has to worry about, because yes, she's still receiving texts from the power broker, the king or queen of Madripoor, and clearly the power broker is very angry that Karli got away with all of the samples of the serum. But not only that, after the events of last week's episode, we did see the death, the murder of Dr. Nagel, which means that the person that the power broker was counting on being able to reproduce the serum and kind of mass produce it for sale is no longer available. So they're really upset that they've lost their golden goose, as Sharon mentions. And as a result, the power broker's even angrier at this point with Karli and is coming to get her. And as her associates tell her, she can't fight all of these fights on all of these different fronts. So they're definitely thinning out, especially since she can no longer make new super soldiers for her cause. So she's in deep hot water at this point. But when it comes to the mystery surrounding who the power broker is, I think I can say with a little bit of certainty, the power broker is Sharon. And I do have evidence to support this theory, okay? First of all, it is established in last week's episode that the power broker sees all. Now, when you take into account the characters who happen to be at the right place at the right time, Sharon definitely comes to mind, because of course we did see a glimpse of her at that bar where Sam, Bucky and Zemo were hanging out in order to find out where Zemo can get a hold of his contact in Madripoor. So she was there, behind that hoodie, suggesting that once again she sees all. And not only that, but when the actual meeting that Zemo has with his contact goes south, the first person to take matters into her own hands is of course Sharon, who ends up killing Zemo's contact. So again, we already know that she's bloodthirsty at this point and she's angry at this point. And we even saw at the end of last week's episode that while Sam and Bucky headed off with Zemo back to Europe, Sharon stayed behind and she had this little meeting with her associate or something where she got back in the car and she said, we have a problem. And I think the problem that she was talking about is the fact that Dr. Nagel is now dead. And so when we fast forward to this week's episode, we see that she is communicating with Sam and Sam is trying to get her help in order to find Karli. But what he doesn't realize is that she is also very invested in finding Karli, because yes, she stole from her. She stole from her and she's been sending her texts anyway. So she's like, two birds, one stone. If I can get a pardon from Sam and from helping Sam and Bucky, that's great. But then I can also get my hands on Karli for stealing my serum. So I think that's what's going on there. And I think that's why Sharon is offering up her services using her satellite, right? The power broker sees all. She has access to 2 satellites in order to help Sam find Karli so that she can wring her little throat out herself. And finally, let's talk about the bombastic ending that we got this episode. And of course, the character that is centered around, Fake Cap, also known as John Walker. The character's self-esteem has been chipped out throughout the entirety of this series. We've seen time and time again that this character is deeply insecure, especially when it comes to his role as Captain America. He knows that he has big shoes to fill, and so he's constantly being weighed down by the expectations of being Captain America and the legacy that Steve Rogers left behind, and whether or not he feels like he can meet those expectations, let alone even exceed them. And he sees time and time again that that might be harder than he ever would have anticipated because of the threats that he's coming up against. These super soldiers, you know, these people who are just out of his league. He's used to dealing with regular old human beings in war, wars like Afghanistan, where he got a lot of medals for what he was able to do there, although he recognizes that a lot of the stuff that he did there was, it didn't make him a good person, okay? It made him a good soldier. And that's a really interesting distinction to make when it comes to this character, is that the government has chosen a good soldier to be Captain America, but not necessarily a good man. And that's a distinction that was made in Captain America the First Avenger by Dr. Erskine himself, who said that whilst that dream guy that the government wanted to make Captain America initially in that film was a good soldier, he wasn't necessarily a good man, and that's why Dr. Erskine chose Steve Rogers instead. We're seeing this kind of play out literally 80 or 90 years later with John Walker. He is that soldier that could have been a Captain America 80 years ago had the US government gotten their way, and we see how that's starting to unravel real quick because one of his first actions as Captain America with the super soldier serum running through his veins is to kill someone in cold blood, in broad daylight, caught on 4K. Caught on 4K by people's cameras around. Oh, how embarrassing. It's been leading up to this, okay? The end game here was pretty clear from the very get-go. Whether or not you know a lot about the character of US Agent from the comics, we already knew that it was about to take a downturn for this character, and the little issues that he had in his personality were going to be amplified should he have taken the serum, and we see that play out in this episode. I will say though, whilst his self-esteem has been chipped at slowly but surely throughout the entirety of the series, I think the breaking point I think the straw that broke the camel's back, okay, for being honest, yes, it was the death, of course, of his friend Lamar, who we did see him working with Lamar during that action sequence at the end of the episode. We saw their entry, which very much mirrored the entry of Steve and Bucky during Captain America Civil War, so there was a nice parallel there. And we also see how well they work together as a team, which is in large contrast to how Sam and Bucky work together as a team, as I said. So it was nice to see them work together as a team and see that there was a genuine friendship between them. And so of course that was going to be the breaking point when Lamar was killed. But another clear breaking point for the character was when the Dora Milaje the Dora Milaje beat him up, and at the end of the fight, Wyatt Russell just has this most pathetic, dejected look on his face, and he's like, "We weren't even super soldiers." But that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Falcon and the Winter Soldier episode 4, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this episode down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!